Welcome to the Open Talent Report, the award-winning podcast where we dive deep into the emerging trends in global employment, the future of work, the talent crisis, the demographic deficit, and the new world of work with our expert host, Connor Heaney. Connor is the managing director at CXE EMEA, a company that takes the hassle out of finding, compliantly engaging and paying contractors anywhere in the world. In this podcast, Connor brings you captivating conversations with top CEOs, visionary founders, and industry experts. Together, they shed light on all things open talent and the evolving nature of work itself. So grab your headphones and join us on this exhilarating journey.
Hello and welcome to this week's show where I'm delighted to be joined by Tim Jacobs. I've had the pleasure of knowing you, Tim, for quite some time. Our audience won't know that until now, though. So I've known Tim for about the last 15 years, coming up to 15 years or so. And we last worked together when we were both in an amazing company that we might touch on today, Tim, called the Rethink Group. Yep. And more recently, Tim has been advising our business in Europe around some process transformation. For our audience, Tim is the founder of Squadrato, and he's an expert in the workforce solutions space. And I always enjoy Tim's particular take on our sector, on labour market trends, and also on regulatory compliance. So, Tim, a warm welcome to the show. How the hell are you doing?
I'm very well, Connor. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to shoot the breeze with you on these topics. I'm looking forward to it. I think I've been on the podcast. It's a while ago, but quite a few years ago in the pandemic, I think we did a little podcast.
That's right.
We did. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, good. And I think we're focusing on one of our favorite topics, which is IR35, Tim, and hopefully we get to touch on that if we've got time today. So, Tim, for the benefit of our audience, what's your story? How did you end up as the founder at Squadrato? And can you just tell us about your background and your journey in the wonderful world of recruitment, staffing, and human capital?
Sure. Well, I think I always say to people, it's all been a bit of a mistake, really. I went to university, left university with some money needing to be earned fairly quickly, and I was doing the milk round in London at the time, and I interviewed at a company that did recruitment, along with a loads of other interviews I did, and I got offered a job there by a guy you and I both know very well, John Butterfield, and I ended up joining. That was in the late 90s, and I ended up joining at the lowest rung of the sales ladder, a company called Computer People in their West End office on their contracts team, working for a guy called Nick Butcher at the time. And it was the days of fax machines. It was the days of pre-mobile phones, and it was an eye opener, and it was a lot of fun. I'd done some sales jobs when I was a student. I'd worked on markets. I'd sold things, but in department stores, and I just, within about 3 or 4 weeks, I realised that I was sitting next to people who were younger than me that were earning quite a lot of money doing this. And I just loved the people I was working with. I loved the atmosphere. And so I thought I'd do it for a few years, see what would happen. I ended up working up the ranks there. I was working on the contracts team there, hiring, looking to help organisations find freelance and contract tech resource in the late 90s. And then I moved through the ranks. I then ended up joining a firm as it was founded by some of the leaders there, a company called Best International. And it was at that organisation at the end of just around 98, 99, when we started to talk to one of my clients about they were going through a massive contractor hiring piece for the Millennium Bug, if people remember that. And they were going on a big hiring spree over 18 months. And I started to talk to, it was a client of mine, and with the help of some of the leaders, we started talking to the TA function there about taking more responsibility for the hiring process for contractors. And that was my first introduction to thinking a bit more strategically about particularly how staffing businesses could and staffing organizations could help their clients in a deeper way rather than just sourcing, looking at the whole end-to-end process of managing freelance and contract labor. And we ended up, it was for a large insurance company which no longer exists. We ended up becoming embedded with them, with their tech function, and managing and hiring about 150 contractors over a period of about 9 months. And that contract went on for about 3 years. I then left the company. The company I was working for went through a slight event, and I actually gave it up and went and was a dive instructor for 3 years, and then came back saying I'd never work in recruitment again. Then I came back after traveling the world for about 18 months as a dive instructor, and I found a role working for RBS at the time, who were merging Direct Line and Churchill into one business and they had to hire 100 Cobalt Kicks DB2 people over Christmas. I remember this, going down to Croydon and helping them go through that exercise. And again, I began to see the importance of, for end users, what an important how strategically important it was to have the right resources in the right place at the right time, and what a headache what a drag it was on their ability to deliver on their priorities and on the projects and programs that they had. I remember after that experience, I then went to work for Lloyd's Banking Group, and I remember working for the bank and having to attend the project governance meeting, the global project governance meeting, to talk about resourcing and why resourcing could or could not support new projects that were going to be launched over the next 6 months, and really getting into workforce planning and resource planning and seeing how important and strategic it was for the ability of that organization to be able to deliver. This is all in the tech space. So I was working on client side for a bit, and after that, I then joined the organisation where we met. Again, founded by some people that I'd worked with in the past, a company called Breathing Group. I was there for 16 years or so, and we worked together as part of an acquisition, didn't we, Connor? I ended up being the group commercial director for that business. And the last 5-6 years of that that business started as a contingent staffing business, and that went through a maturity to turn itself into a talent management business and grow its recurring revenue annuity services business. With the intention of acquiring RPO and MSP services, that role was, as you know, Connor, quite all-encompassing and involved transforming the business, internally transforming the processes that went on in the business to be able to deal with that growth, but also working with the sales function and the MDs to really be able to come up with a proposition to end clients that was meaningful to them and help them solve their challenges. And then I was in the process of sort of exiting that business when the pandemic hit, and wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And then I during that time, I'd also sat on the board of the UK Trade Association for the staffing and recruitment industry, the REC, and I'd come across a lot of recruitment and staffing business owners, and also at SIA actually, who were in other sectors. So my background was very much in tech and change, and I started to talk to recruitment business owners and staffing businesses in other sectors who were talking to me about their clients' challenges, and I was aware that there wasn't as much maturity in the way that those organisations were acquiring talent. And I thought there was an opportunity to help those businesses or help staffing businesses develop annuity services for their clients, because I firmly believe that's what their clients want. And so Squadrato was started as a consulting business. I worked with a few associates, and we primarily we have sort of three customer bases. We have staffing businesses, SME or largish organisations, UK based predominantly, who want to either begin to mature their service offering to clients or have a service offering to clients that they want to do better. I've also worked with some companies in the rec tech sector as well, who have technology that supports the recruitment process, but specifically needs to talk to some of those mature service offerings and how those businesses can be better positioned, and also how their operational robustness as well as their user interface can support those sorts of services. And we also do some work for what we'd call end clients, or what I would call end clients. So working directly with organisations to help them either reimagine or mature the way in which they use particularly contingent labour. So a lot of that in the last 2 years or so has been UK-based companies who have had some struggles with understanding what their contingent worker landscape is, because they've had to become more interested in that because of the legislation that you've talked about, Connor. So that's a potted history, but that all took, I've been doing this for about 28 years or so, something like that.
Yeah.
Wagging on about this stuff for quite a long time. So,
Yeah. Well, Tim, thanks for sharing that. And like, Tim, I love working with you, and I've thoroughly enjoyed working with your company over the last year, and we're learning a lot from you. And I think your attention to detail, but also your ability to see the blue sky and the bigger picture is really helpful for organizations that are going on a change, transformation, and maturity journey. Tim, you mentioned something there that I don't think when we were prepping for this, we discussed at all, but you piqued my interest because it's something I'm weirdly interested in, which is in relation to resource demand planning or strategic workforce planning. And there's a gentleman by the name of Doug Leby who's been on the show before, great friend of CXC and a great friend of the show. He's the Chief Executive Officer at Beeline, the Extended Workforce Management or VMS platform. But Doug has a line that I've heard at many conferences, which always resonates me, but maybe not in the way that he intends, which is that it's about people, not pencils, right? And I often think about resource demand planning in the opposite way, that if we can look at how manufacturing companies plan for making pencils instead of acquiring people, can we learn from how the resources they need to make those pencils properly and get them out and shipped, or whether it's beer bottle tops or beer bottles, can we as a sector, right, that is in the interest of acquiring people or acquiring talent, can we learn from the manufacturing sector when it comes to resource demand planning? Because I think, Tim, organizations often want or think they're getting, I suppose, talent first in time, but quite often it's not even just in time, it's last in time, no matter how good their service delivery partners are, how good their internal talent acquisition team is. So I suppose what my question really is how important is strategic workforce planning to organizations? And do you think organizations have sufficiently matured, particularly in the large enterprise space, in that particular I suppose what my question is really is, are they good at it, and are they aware of it, and can they do more to get better at that?
well, it's a good question, because I think it lies at the heart of all the ecosystem that we work in, Connor. Um, uh, it's if an organization can solve that or be good at that, then everything else becomes a lot easier. Succession planning, talent acquisition, all of those things become a lot easier. I think you and I would recognize dealing with end clients, hiring is often done, a large majority of hiring is done under stress, just time stress. It hasn't been planned properly. So being able to be able to solve that and reduce the amount of stress hiring that you need to do because you planned brilliantly is undoubtedly the secret to success for any organization. And I think that challenge becomes more difficult on two fronts. One is being sure of what your needs and demands are going to be as a business. So for say a retail business, they have a very clear understanding broadly of what their staffing demands are going to be year on year, and they can plan for that. They know roughly how many people they'll need in the shop in over each individual month. They've got all the data. They can plan for that to happen. But shocks can happen and things can happen, and they have to go off piste. When you're talking about when you sort of look at other sectors like professional services or knowledge-based organizations, that becomes more difficult for two reasons. One, I think many professional services businesses are, because they're project-based by nature, they find it difficult to have they find it difficult to understand what their project stats going to look like, but 6 months hence. So using the example of the bank I was talking about, being able to plan their project stack in 6 months hence would be good at being good at that would have solved a lot of problems, but it was very difficult to do because there were priorities were changing. The other piece to that puzzle is managing the resources that you have. And from a knowledge-based perspective, it becomes difficult because people have relationships. So in the shop, people have relationships with their shop workers and give certain shop workers certain shifts because there's a relationship of some description. At the bank, there's Jane Smith up the road, who's just known as being good. She's just known as being the best project manager. Everybody knows she's the best project manager, so they all want Jane to be their project manager. So Jane's always the one with always in demand. There are other project managers that on paper, in Beeline, look like the same as Jane, but all the other people know that Jane's the best one. So there's the whole human interaction thing that gets in the way, but is part of the challenge of resource planning. But I think the first principle is having a baseline for what you know your needs are going to be over a reasonable time period. But technology can really help with that to give you a view of what your resources look like. But it's still there's still emails, there's still WhatsApp groups, there's still conversations that happen. So my wife actually works in change and transformation in strategic projects, have for many years for a large media company. And I hear this with her. She works on projects, and yet so her line manager, she has a resource manager, a line manager who is nominally involved in allocating the work that she does. But it doesn't work like that. The program managers reach out to her and go, I've got a project starting next. Are you available? Have you got availability? I'd really like you to be on this project. Oh, it's to do with customer services. You're the go-to person for customer services. And none of that is in Workday. None of that is being, the allocation's happening in Workday, but the interactions aren't happening in Workday. And I think, I know we want to talk about I think one of the topics we're going to talk about is back in the office stuff.
Yes,
and people coming back into the office and being in the office and having, and I do wonder if that human nature will draw people back into the office to be able to build those connections, to be able to better resource plan with that stuff. And I do wonder, I've got no data on this, but I do wonder if that resource planning piece and having relationships with people is intimately linked. We've just had but unusually locally, we've just had a new pub open, an old pub that was empty for 2 years. Somebody's taken it over and started it up again, just down there. And I know the people who are running it. They have to get staff in to run it. How many members of staff do you need? Who are the good people? Who are the not good people? Well, they could use an app for that. But it isn't quite how it works. It's like, do you fancy doing a shift on Friday? Yeah, I'll do a shift on Friday. Oh, right, I'll put that in the app then. The scheduling stuff happens. I think the resource planning stuff doesn't happen. And when the ability to resource plan doesn't happen. So organizations need to be brilliant at having a clear idea of what their demand is going to be, and then have a really good data and metrics on what their resource pools look like. And they need to maintain those things. They need to have, we've just done a project, a Sophia project for a large utilities company, which is specifically about understanding what their resource pool looks like and whether there are cross-pollination in skills between different teams, etc. But as soon as you finish that, it's got to be maintained. It's out of date. So it's a whole piece around getting, and you've got to work at it, and you've got to keep that data up to date, and you've got to inspect that data, and you've got to live by that data. So yeah, I think it's key to, it's the whole reason that the staffing ecosystem exists is to meet the demands of what organizations need from a talent acquisition perspective. Solving the conundrum of being better at managing resources is the key to being successful in managing the talent that you have. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of process and a lot of consistency, which everybody struggles with.
Yes,
all organizations struggle with.
They do, Tim. But I think
a long answer to a
no. I think it's an absolutely brilliant answer, Tim, and for the following reasons. I think it gives a good baseline advice for anyone that's thinking about this or struggling with this, or if you're in procurement or you're a program manager and you're listening, you're thinking, God, what do I need to do? I think the advice and expertise that you've showcased there, Tim, are spot on, and our listeners would do well to follow. Yeah, Tim, and the other point about that is, I think you're right about the ecosystem piece, but I think it can always be more efficient, right? And if you can understand your demand, and marry that demand and supply base, whatever it is, whether it's marketplace, direct sourcing, tier 0, internal TA team, talent pool, internal talent pool, whatever the hell it is, I think it can be a much more efficient process. So I'm really glad we spent the time to talk about that, Tim.
Yeah, I think where the key thing are obviously understanding what demand is, but understanding the skills base that you have in your organization is critical as well. The NHS struggles with that in a very skills based talent pool, but keeping track of all of that and keeping those quantitative skills understood is the first building block to be able to make sure that you can resource plan and or have a view of what that resource plan is going to look like. Even if it's not perfect, then at least you can react to it as you go on the journey.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And Tim, when we look at your 28-year career, When you think back to some of the biggest challenges or challenge that you faced, is there any that you've faced head on and you've overcame? And I suppose what have you learned from it, and what are you willing to share?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me that question. I've been trying to think about that question quite a lot. I can think of I'm going to talk about a challenge that I have about myself, that I have grown as an individual as a result of over the years professionally, and that is I have had to learn to be open and embrace change and not fear change. And it might seem like a trait that doesn't necessarily fit with the sort of work that I do or my career, but the example I was going to use was when I was working for Rethink, and the sales team won the biggest RPO that we'd ever won. And during that sales process, I mean, I wasn't leading that sales process; I was part of that sales process. But as a result of that, we were going to have to hire 35 talent partners to work on that account, or maybe more, even 40 talent partners in the space of less than 8 weeks. And it was a brilliant opportunity to win by rights. We shouldn't necessarily have won it, but we had to go and implement that service very quickly with the customer. It was aware that we had to go through that process, but the ability of the team to be able to, it felt at the time, there were other things that we had to do, but that felt at the time to me as a big, almost insurmountable challenge. But I was reminded by the MD at the time, Graham, about how we should be able to do that because we were a recruitment business. We should be able to recruit that number of people, and we did it successfully. Yeah, this was it was an example to me of it's being open to change and heading into change, eyes wide open, looking at what the solutions are rather than just focusing on what the problem is or what the challenge is.
Yes.
So I've really, and I still, even in my personal life, sometimes find it challenging to not focus on what we're trying to achieve, but just focus on what the solution is to try and get there. So it's something I try and remind myself of whenever I hear my customers talk to me about their challenges, is to focus on the steps that we need to go through to get to a successful outcome. So
fair play, Tim.
makes sense.
It does, Tim, and thanks for displaying your vulnerability and being so open. Like, Tim, just maybe as an extension of that, you've been in business now 6 years with your thriving consultancy, Squadrato, which, as I mentioned, we've in our organization get great value and from your expertise and that of your associates. But I think back to my early days, which is coming up to 10 years in CXE here in Europe, and getting a business off the ground from zero. Now, I suppose I was lucky, Tim, in terms of I had the blessing and support of our now chairman and then CEO, and it was a known brand, but maybe not a known brand in Europe. And we started at zero, right? Zero revenues, zero clients, zero, right? Now, we didn't have a huge pool of capital behind us, like we're a privately held company, no VC, no PE, and it's a real, what I would call, bootstrapped effort. But think back to those early days now, right? I sort of had to look at them with rose-tinted glasses, like it was like so easy, but it was so hard. But in that difficulty, right, of getting a business off the ground, I probably learned more than I've Yeah, of course you're learning every year, run the business for 10 years. And of course you hopefully evolve as a business leader over that 10-year period. But I think that first year and probably those first 3 years were some of the most enjoyable times I've had, even though our business wasn't at the size and scale that it is now, which, it's growing every year, 25% year on year, right? So we're really growing quite fast. But like if you think back to your time, particularly in the early days, but even now, 6 years in, Tim, like, has it been a challenge? You go from, salaried job with a thriving company such as Rethink, right, where you're a senior business leader and then essentially going and getting something off the ground. Is it anything you care to share just in terms of the experience around that? And would you agree with some of the things I said?
It's funny you should bring this up because friends of mine often make the same point that God, just look at what you've achieved in the last sort of 5-6 years. You've gone and done something completely different. And I think, Connor, you and I have discussed this in the past. I sometimes have to remind myself that has happened because I just cracked on with it. Really, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I felt like I didn't have a plan B, which I didn't. So I had to kind of make this work. I was lucky because partly I was lucky because I've just been on the planet long enough and made enough connections in the sector to be able to talk to lots of people and was connected to lots of people, so could have lots of conversations with people when I started doing it. I also did think quite carefully about the problem or challenges I wanted to solve for people, the things that I thought I had experience in and I was good at, and the things I thought that organizations would need help with, and was quite specific with that. Now that gave me confidence because I had a reason. I knew what I wanted to talk to people about. So it was a good starting point for me to go and talk to people. I think what I've really enjoyed is that as a result of that, being introduced to lots of other people who I never would have met in lots of different sectors, in sectors I didn't even know existed of staffing, and in business sectors I didn't really know too much about either, which has been a real, really enjoyable. But but the things that I found difficult are the motivation to keep having those, to keep reaching out to new people. When you don't have a collective around you, like your senior leadership team, Connor, are there to kind of
Brilliant.
You lead them. Yeah, they're brilliant. You lead them, but they also challenge you to.
Yes.
And you've got to see them every day, and you're almost pushed on by them as you are pushing them on.
Great.
And my whole career had been, I've realized how important that was in my early career. So now I find that can be quite difficult. And I'm actively trying to go and physically see my clients now. I really miss the office, actually, not every day, but a lot of the time. I miss the social element of the office, which actually fed into my ability to be able to continue to push on with some of the tasks that I needed to do. I suppose the other thing I would say is that if anybody's out there and wanting to sort of build a portfolio career or build a consulting career, just really go back to those contacts, though that contact book, that network of people that I've touched over the years, has been really important to me. And when I was in recruitment school and in sales school, always wipe your feet on the way out, always treat people with respect, and you'll always have that connection with people. So those are the things that I've really learned over the last 6 years.
Yeah. That's brilliant, Tim. That's really good. Like, Tim, this might, even though we've known each other a reasonably long time, I think I would describe myself as an introverted extrovert, right? So although outwardly it might seem that I love doing the podcast, which I do, right? But going to conferences, which I do, and speaking at conferences, I would much rather be in my hotel room reading a book, right? Yeah, so like, and like you have been very lucky in my life to make some great connections, and really treating people with respect and having good manners, and listening, and not being too pushy. But I think that the power of the network and the power of connections and good connections and looking after your connections is just requisite, right? It's room 101 stuff, but I don't think everyone always gets that, and indeed appreciates it. And I think it's when you're getting something off the ground, like you've done, Tim, successfully, like I've done successfully. It's all those contacts I made over the years that really got this business going, right? It was them taking a chance on me and taking a chance on us, and I'm so grateful for that over the years, those connections. But Tim, there is something that you've raised that I want to keep on talking about it, if you're okay with it, and it's really two things. I want to talk about the remote work cursor cure, right? And that's a rather trite way of describing it. But if I think back to our time at the Rethink group, Tim, for me, it was one of my favorite experiences in my working career, with the exception of CXC, because I felt it was an aspirational company. It had a culture of delegation, a culture of autonomy, a culture of being almost like a scrappy underdog and winning large deals that we and they and should never have won. And I just loved the pace there, Tim, particularly in that period when Rethink acquired the company that I was working for at the time, here in Ireland, where I'm based. But when you think about organizational culture, and even if you think about the time at Rethink, and you've worked for some large, huge organizations, RBS, Lloyds, you've mentioned, like, in your view, what makes an organization's culture so special?
Um, well, the trite answer to that is the people that are in that organization. But I think that becomes that what I mean by that is the teams. It's a team level. It's where you can affect a culture or behaviors across an organization that are exhibited in the teams that people work in. So I think even in large organizations, very large organizations, there are groups and subgroups of people who work together on projects or work together on services or deliver services on behalf of that organization. And the ability to be able to get a way of behaving that's consistent really propagates a culture and a way of feeling about the company. The organization that we worked for, I recognize all the things that you're talking about there, Connor, but I'd also say that one of the things I learned from that experience of acquiring businesses was the challenge in recognizing that there's differences that need to be incorporated, and having a clear vision of what that culture needs to look like and what that culture needs to be is so important in making sure that you can build that, and it's making it simple and not too complex. Dealing with behavior that's unacceptable in the right way, and rewarding behavior that is the right behavior all consistently. I remember this. My impression was you were working in Dublin at the time. You were never in the office, actually. You were always out with clients.
Always.
Of course. Or one of the two.
All
Well, all three. But your, I was going to say spectre. I don't mean spectre. Your presence was known because of you kept in touch. You kept in touch with the teams that you were working with, and they understood what was required of them, and the way in which you wanted that to be done, the way in which you wanted them to act. So I think this is all quite, standard stuff in terms of building a team. But I think you often come across large organizations where that isn't. As a consumer, you can often come across large organizations where that isn't the case. Just today, I've been trying to deal with a large utility company that has been them. Well, I've been trying to deal with two large utility companies, and the experience has been very different of talking to or engaging with them. Both of them were trying to drive a tech-first approach, which is fine. I understand that from a customer services perspective, but the query that I had couldn't, be dealt with by the chatbot. It did need to be dealt with by a customer services representative. But the ability that those or my impression anyway, the ability of those customer services representatives to actually take action or own the problem or be able to behave in a way that I felt that they were dealing with it was chalk and cheese, and they were, talking off they were talking off call sheets, they were talking off, their call tracks, etc. So I think it's about being really clear about what the core behaviours you want to see, and then promoting those all the way through the organisation. That's where I've seen great company cultures develop. And I've also seen where they've then fallen apart because those behaviours have not been exhibited, but all the way through the organisation.
Yeah, I think that's a really great analysis, Tim. Tim, you touched on this earlier, and I really want to delve deeper in this on remote work specifically. What are you concerned about remote work reducing team cohesiveness, reducing that ability particularly for younger people to learn the culture and get ahead? Like if I think about my career, although I was out a lot selling and pressing the flesh, as I like to say, like spending time with senior leaders, guys like yourself, a whole list of people that we work with, him, Fergal Brosnan, who was my boss for a long time ago. I learned so much from guys and some of the female leaders in our business, like Joanna Houston, for example, long time ago. But do you think that's being lost, Tim, with remote work? And do you have any wider concerns on remote work?
Well, I think this is rearing its ugly head again, isn't it? Or this debate is been fanned recently, hasn't it? About remote work. The first thing I always say about this is a debate for the laptop classes. This really is a debate for the laptop classes.
So true.
This is not a debate for what my brother does in facilities management with people working, not coming into the office or whatever. His head office is full 7 days a week because it needs to be. My wife's company, large media company, there are people who just have to be there to deliver what the media company does, deliver the broadcasting that organisation needs to do. I miss the office personally. Right, I don't have a choice but to be remote. I think that, for what it's worth, I agree with you 100% that particularly for emerging talent in some of the knowledge sectors that we deal with, Connor,
yes,
and the professional services sectors, it's absolutely critical for emerging talent to be able to be with senior leaders. However, those experienced senior leaders want the flexibility of being at home, right?
So true.
Well, they do, because they've got kids. They feel they've done their time, etc., etc. So, as with many things in life, it's about balance, and I think it will balance out. I often say that pre-pandemic, literally in 2018, 2019, my experience in central London anyway was there was quite a lot of working from home on a Friday. There's quite a lot of working from home on a Thursday.
Yes, indeed.
And we didn't really, wring our hands about it. there's also, technologies. The technology that we now use that's enabled us to be productive from working from home it existed then. It's better now, but I think we'll just come to a balance around it. I think it'll balance out, and people will find that right balance, and good leaders will understand that they need to develop talent within their organization, and key part to that is being with them, is interacting with them, is demonstrating how they would go about doing the job. And I think those people entering the workforce will want that. They'll want that. They'll want a leader who will be like that. They'll be attracted to a leader who will be present with them, who will take them through their thinking, who will share what they're doing. In my career, I've worked with senior people who sat in an office all day and never came out, so were effectively working from home anyway. So I think and I didn't think they're not people who've impacted on my career or my experience. So
Yes.
So I think, just as there's a lot of chat about, you'll never be able to hire anyone, and any Gen X's or Gen Z's or Gen Alphas because they all want to work from home. Well, some of them do a bit, some of them don't, but also they want to learn. And if you can't offer a learning environment, part of that learning environment is human interaction. We were talking about connection to networks before.
Yes.
The strongest connections I have are not on LinkedIn. They're on WhatsApp.
Yes.
So they're in the pub.
Yeah.
They're people I've met. They just are. That's just human nature.
Yeah.
It's just, and I don't see that changing. So I just think we're going to find a balance, and we'll stop talking about it, and there'll be less LinkedIn posts about it because we'll find a balance. And I don't think we're far off what it was in 2018, 2019, but there has been a shift. There has been a shift in some roles. There has been a shift in some roles where actually it is, for the organisations, it's cheaper to do that. The utility company I was talking about earlier, all the people I was talking to were remote in South Africa, in India, in all over the place. They were all with us working. They weren't in the head office. So,
I agree with Tim, even though the company I run day to day is remote first, right? And has been even pre-pandemic, right? It's worked from us from a capital efficiency point of view, but also from a talent attraction point of view. We're able to get the talent we need where they want to be. And of course, we bring people together as and when they want to. And of course, if people want to work in an office environment, we say, go and get a WeWork, we'll cover the cost, or not a WeWork wing or anything, but if they need to work in a more structured office environment, and I need that myself, Tim. I mean, I work from what I call the garden room, but it's a shed at the bottom of my garden, right? And it's bloody freezing. But I sort of miss going in occasionally, maybe once or twice a week into an office, and I think if I think back as well to my earlier career, you sort of lose that cultural capital. And we're not pro-alcohol in the show or anything like that, Tim, but there was something lovely when I worked in London and when I worked in Dublin about going out with your workmates and your peers and your leadership for a pint or a coffee on a Thursday. Like if you think back to central London, 2017, 2018, pre-pandemic, it was bloody brilliant on a Thursday night. That was the night, but there were so many connections forged in that way.
But it still is. But my experience before Christmas is still is. It's still like, it still is. There's still a lot of that going on. And I think, certainly my experience of working with CXC being remote first, I've got, obviously I'm trying to build influence with a new customer with your senior leadership team. Get those workshops that we've done together, the sessions that we've had in Dublin, etc., have been so valuable for me anyway, in terms of getting under the skin of the organisation. And I think people will want to do it, but there's some more transactional jobs where it does work better. So, it's funny that this is a debate that's been raging for 2.5, 3 years. I think it's an example of people struggling to, it's an example of dealing with change. It's just different. It's just everyone's discovered all these tools which will make their jobs more efficient. The video conferencing, Zoom meetings, all of those sorts of things, they are more efficient. They're better than a phone call, probably. I mean, I'm never on the phone. I'm never on the phone work-wise. We used to be glued to our phones, left, right, centre.
Yeah.
I'm never on the phone anymore. It happened literally within 6 months, 9 months. The phone was dead. The phone call was dead. You don't ring people up anymore. You've booked meet times in their diaries anymore. It's just different. And we're gonna, our behaviour is going to change, and it'll sort of balance out. All of those things will sort of balance out. And I think we're in a balance. I think we're close to what was used to be referred to as the new normal. I think I think we're probably close to what it is. There's just some headline grabbing stuff that the media use to talk about this stuff. And I think, the mandates about getting people back into the office are for business owners, for people who run companies. I think, that's kind of their prerogative if they want more people to be back in the office. But you often hear these media stories, and then, so I've got some friends around here who work for Amazon, and AWS. Everyone has to be back in the office 5 days a week. Yeah, that mandate went out. Was it before Christmas or like in the autumn? Yeah. Everyone has to be back in the office. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
They're 3 days a week. They're 4 days a week.
exactly. It's when you strip a lot of this stuff back, it's more nuanced. There's a lady I speak about on the show a lot called Anita Letting, Tim, and what you said about your brother and other workers like your brother. She calls the deskless workers, and I think by her estimates that she estimates that roughly 2/3 of the working population globally is so-called deskless workers, right? And I suppose the laptop classes, if you like, or the knowledge workers, ourselves included, they've probably got the access to the LinkedIns and the social channels because they're at their bloody desks, at their computers, and they're sort of shouting about this the loudest. And yeah. So I like your take.
Social, well, it's the rule around social media, isn't it? Roughly only 20% of social media accounts post. Of the people that post, only 5% post regularly, and those 5% post a lot. So it's I tend to look at the world through my own eyes and what I see and experience. Some of that is wrong because I'm only looking at it from a certain point of view, and I'm surrounded by a certain type of people, or I'm living in a certain place. But I think it's something that people are just finding their own way. And if the people want to work that way, they'll work that way. I think the good thing is there's more flexibility now for people to genuinely. There's flexibility from an employee perspective about getting to what works for people.
Yes,
and there's more trust, and there's more. There's more trust in the capabilities of people to do it, and also in terms of the infrastructure to be able to achieve working from home. But long may it continue, and I think it is going to continue. It's going to continue.
Yeah, I agree, Tim. I find this subject fascinating, and just staying on on labour market trends, Tim. It's been a fascinating ride in the labour market globally, but particularly in Western labour markets during the COVID-19 pandemic, and really since that time. And if I look at some of the data points, most Western labour markets are at full employment or close to full employment. Most Western labour markets, with some notable exceptions, are experiencing and have experienced what has been referred to as the demographic decline or the demographic deficit. And really what that means is that over the last 50 years, not enough people have been produced to come into the labour market. And then the third sort of component is that a lot of Western labour markets have actually reduced the ability to bring in labour or people from other locations, right? So there's much more regulation and restrictions around immigration or migration, and what that's having an impact on is essentially organisations' ability to access talent in their markets, because in some respects that talent might not exist, or it might not exist in the abundance that it did previously, Tim. And I suppose what my question really is, Tim, um, do you think there's any tools, techniques, tactics, strategies that the enterprise organization can adopt to help deal with some of these labor market trends and these what I would argue are pretty seismic shifts?
Well, it's a big question. I think there's something more fundamental going on with labor the labor market paradox, if you want to call it that, which I think there is an inflection point coming, because you have this broadly full employment in a number of high income countries, but organizations still find it difficult to hire skilled people or people with the right skills, or good people, quotes. I think the go-to thing for organizations is to consider automation as much as possible. I think that's always the way in which you cope with not having enough labor. But I do wonder if there are fundamental weaknesses in the way in which we are preparing what the labor force that we do have. When I talk to school leavers, which I do a bit, I've through friends and family, and also through some stuff that I do off my own back. Many of, particularly when they're particularly well-educated school leavers, so they leave university, for example, they don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. Their experience is it's hard to find a job. It's big, and I think organizations need to think about how they acquire early talent really carefully and be very clear about where they're going to get their early talent and then retain that early talent. In terms of the business as usual of how they go about their business with less people, automation is going to form part of it, but I think it's also about integrating those tools into their existing workforce so that they can become more productive. So for me, it's not about automating jobs out of existence. It's about making the person more automated in the job that they do, or having automation to help them do their job, more of their job. So I've seen this happen in the last 18 months.
Right.
With my wife, in the job that she does, she had a lot of work. She was being spread too thin on the projects that she was working on. And the organization she was working for had a hiring freeze on, they're a technology media company, they had a hiring freeze on, just like lots of other organizations. They tried to find some talent. They tried to find some person internally to help, but they couldn't. So there wasn't anybody available, or there wasn't anybody available for 3 weeks or 3 months to be able to second into the team. So they started using AI tools and taught the teams how to use AI tools to be able to achieve more, and not replace that person, but the bandwidth that was suddenly created meant that they could do more. So, that is an example that I've seen with my own eyes, but it required some training. It required some investment. It wasn't just about buying the tool. It was about thinking carefully about how the tool could be integrated and using the tool properly. But I've also spoken to, from personal experience, I've also spoken to somebody who works for a large supermarket, on the shop floor at a large supermarket. They're struggling to consistently hire people to work on the shop floor, to put product on shelf, to run the store, to do all of those sorts of things. In London, because I live in London, I'd argue they're not paying enough, but that's part by the by. The challenge they had is they can't find enough people at the right time when they need to start shelf stacking, or when they need to start pricing, when they need to do stuff. Now, the supermarket in question recognised that. They still need the people, but they've now rolled out much more integrated handheld devices which automate so much of what they used to. Like 18 months ago, it was taking them, they've halved the time it takes for them to do stock takes now, to be able to take orders in, to be able to distribute orders onto the shelves. The orders come off the lorry in the order that they need to go onto the shelves in their store, so they can put it on more efficiently. So I think there's those sorts of questions that people should ask about their day to day. I'm sort of running out of. I'm not sure I'm answering your question here. Yeah, it's the labour market. The labour market paradox is essentially we're all going to face, every country, the world is going to face this because birth rates are declining.
Yes.
It's happened. Japan is the place where this is happening in real life, and you can see where this is happening in real life. And our ability to be able to use machines to do more of this, to be able to replace some of the lost hands, but also make sure that the hands that we have got can do more.
Yeah.
And be really clear that as an organisation, I think you need to be much more open to bringing in early talent and curating early talent. There's a whole different conversation about whether the education system is even producing the sort of people that educated people in the right things in the first place. But that's a debate that's been going on for 35 years, so as long as I can remember. But
yeah. And Tim, I think I love that point you make about the hands that are working, that we help them and essentially do not replace them, right? And that I really like that. I know I'm paraphrasing and summarizing for you. Tim, as we bring our conversation to a close, I know we've covered a lot and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But Tim, I'd love to get your take on your prediction or predictions for the future of work.
Well, I think that prediction, there was a prediction that I've heard a lot of a few years ago, which was work will stop being a place that you go to and be time that you spend. I think that's coming to fruition. As we've seen it happen, that work is becoming a period of time that you spend time on work. It's not a place that you go to. It's become a more nebulous thing. I think the future of work is also going to be one of constantly learning, much more so than it ever has been. It's going to be a constant evolution of skills at a much more fast pace. You've got to have the ability to be able to use more tools more quickly and get to use them more quickly and be open to using them more quickly. And I think the future of work is really going to be with the young people. We've got to be better. And I'm talking about the UK here. This is quite UK centric, but I think we've got to be better at making the transition from education into work much more successfully. I think we're missing because it's not as structured as it could be. We're missing talent that could really make a difference to our economy and to the world of work, because it gets lost. It's not identified properly. The opportunities that exist are not communicated out to people after education to kids coming into the world of work, there's not enough help in that front. And, you know, us old people probably need to be thinking about working longer and spending more time in our older years, probably doing a bit more work. Some of that may be, you know, a financial impact, but some of that's also because there's going to be a need for that experience, you know, whatever that might be.
I agree, Tim. And I think, Tim,
That's it. I haven't got a crystal ball.
no. But Tim, I think it's a lovely way to bring our conversation to a close. And Tim, I really appreciate the time. I know you're busy, and thanks so much for coming on the show to give your thoughts on the future of work and what's going on in the world of work. And it's been a real pleasure having this conversation with you, Tim. And just for the benefit of our audience, Tim, should they want to reach out and hear more about you and Squadrato, where's the best way to contact you?
It's going to be LinkedIn. First off, you'll find me on LinkedIn, Tim Jacob at Squadrato. I'm always happy to have a chat with people about anything that they're finding as a challenge.
Wonderful. Well, Tim, thanks so much. Have a lovely evening ahead, and we'll catch up soon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Open Talent Report with Connor Heaney. If you found this podcast informative and engaging, make sure you subscribe, tell your friends, and follow us on all your favorite streaming platforms.